Let's go for it. YOLO.
Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest here is Lawrence Wang, and really you're working at MakerDAO, which is an interesting company. Can you tell people a little bit more about what MakerDAO is?
Yeah, sure. So we're a project on the Ethereum blockchain. We've been around for a few years, and we are a stablecoin, which is a cryptocurrency pegged to the US dollar. Stablecoins have been in the news lately because of the Libra project, Facebook's big reveal. They're also creating a stablecoin. There's a lot I could say there about Facebook, but it would be largely speculative since they haven't released that much yet.
Interesting.
It's been interesting for us because for a while we've been positioned as one of the more stable and mature and sort of regulator and government-friendly projects in an otherwise Wild West space. And now that Facebook and its whole consortium is moving to the space, now we're being positioned more as the actually open, permissionless alternative to something like Libra, which is actually, if you look at the details, not actually that open.
Very interesting. So I really want to talk about that, but let's go to philosophy and stress and creativity. Sure. And how do you work with stress? How does stress show up in your life? Do you have stress?
Yeah, I think of stress in really general, broad terms. I think the first time I got this really broad definition of stress, as opposed to a more specific medicalized definition, was way back in college when I encountered The Art of Living. And their whole philosophy was that any sort of health imbalance, any sort of sickness was a result of some sort of stress. And so that could be physical stress, mental stress, emotional stress, relationship stress, anything that is out of alignment or causing some sort of experiential pressure, any sort of feeling of like, I don't like what's going on. And that was a while ago. So since then I've spent a lot of time thinking about how that shows up in my life and sort of the more sophisticated and nuanced and mature ways of dealing with it. And so there's a way in which I'm sort of always attuned to the little stresses, which are no longer so much things to avoid as they are just signals of where I am in the world and should I move around or should I change something.
Interesting. Stress as a signal as to what to do. And this actually goes into pain as well, because pain is a very evolutionarily old mechanism that we have in our body. And it is the thing that pain science tells us is that it's a multi-system output. So that means that it rises from different systems, from the nervous system, from the viscera, from peripheral tissue and stuff like that. And then the other thing is that it's a signaling mechanism. But the signal, because it's so old, it seems like it's not clear. You have to do a lot of inquiry in order to figure out what the signal is when pain. And that also seems like it's important for stress as well. How do you figure this? How do you know what stress is trying to tell you when you experience stress in your life? What are some things that you do? What are some things that you use it to find the right path?
I want to say that it's not so much that the pain signal is itself objectively unclear or difficult to interpret, so much as that the modern context is a lot more complicated than the ancestral context. So there are a lot more different causes, right? It used to be that it was more simple, right? If there was some severe pain, it was either because you were like extremely socially isolated, or you were really hungry or really cold, or you were being chased by something that wanted to eat you. And now it's a lot of very sophisticated things, right? Now it's like you've been on social media for too long, or you're consuming too much marketing, or you're working for a company that doesn't care about you.
Or your environment has some sort of pollutant in it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, all kinds of subtle chemical things as well.
Very interesting. This kind of goes into what I've been reading from Robert Sapolsky in his book, Behave. And it's really interesting because if you look at the brains of people in the hunter-gatherer tribes, 150 is generally the number of social relationships, and now we're in cities with urban environments, and so the rise of our frontal cortex was co-evolutionary with larger groups of people and determining social relationships and stuff like that. And now we're in cities where there's a lot of social relationships, and now we're in digital cities where there's even like way more relationships. And so sometimes I feel like, and now in business and my own experience of business, I'm realizing that a lot of business at a certain level is talking to other people and managing relationships and things like that. And so it becomes very stressful for me to, and I'm introverted in some sense as well, to maintain a lot of relationships with a lot of what seems like a lot more than 150 people.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a sort of stress because, like you're saying, our systems haven't been adapted to dealing with that many people.
And so we're in adaptation, basically, right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, how has that shown up in your life?
Well, I think, I always want to sort of ask the question in two directions. So you said something there about wanting to, or implicitly at least, wanting to be able to scale up your own capacity to have relationships past Dunbar's number. And so the opposite of that question would be, how could I be successful in business while maintaining only the amount of relationships or the number of relationships that actually feels satisfying and good to me?
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that. So is that what you're trying to do, or what you're showing up in your life?
Yeah, definitely. Sort of because you can look at, well, what am I trying to get from this success, right? And it could be, when I unpack a little bit for myself, what I'm trying to get are certainly certain emotional needs met, right? Like that I want to be successful because I think being successful will bring me more esteem among my peers and people I care about, and that will lead to more emotional satisfaction. So then if in the course of trying to chase after that success, I'm depriving myself of emotional satisfaction, I may actually be self-defeating.
Interesting. So, but in business, in some sorts of business, there might be a difference in terms of businesses as well. Relationships become transactional at a certain point. So if you're a VC, then the relationships are transactional because a VC is trying to find that one company that will be $1 billion company, and if they meet with somebody who's not in that path, then it becomes and so that becomes the whole transaction. So, and this is something that I've been asking myself: can we have transactional relationships that are also meaningful? Is that possible?
It's definitely possible. I think to some extent it's sort of a question of what kind of personality you have. Like some people just do transactional relationships, right? Quick, superficial connections better and get more satisfaction out of it. And other people are more about smaller numbers of relationships that go deeper and are longer in time.
And that brings up kind of like signal to noise. And it seems like signal to noise is completely subjective, as in like each person has to define their own signal and noise or find out what their own signal and noise is. Do you think there is objective signal and versus noise?
It's absolutely got to be relative to what you're looking for.
What are you looking for in these days if you're open about it?
I think there's a way in which my spiritual practice has begun to sort of consume the rest of my life, so that increasingly there's this single lens. Like I was meditating in the park earlier before I came here, and this question popped up, and the question was, what is Lawrence for? And I'd never phrased it that way, right? And it's a way of sort of stepping outside of my ordinary identity, where it's like, I want this, I want that, to asking, what does the universe want this particular configuration of personality and atom and so forth for? What is a Lawrence for? What is a Lawrence meant to do in this world? And can I ask that question like objectively? And so then if I navigate not just from my personal sense of want this satisfaction, want this emotional need met, but also this curiosity of like, what am I supposed to be doing here? It's very different.
And what was oftentimes when I find myself asking those questions, the answer is not immediate and the answer is not intellectual. So it's like kind of like just shows up in my life. Like,
for sure.
And so it's only a short time since you asked that question, but what's happened since then?
Well, I'm here.
So Lawrence is here doing this interview.
Yeah, exactly. Like I went into this not really knowing what would happen, right? And I still don't know what's going to happen as I talk to you. But there's some hope that whatever comes up in this dialogue, it'll go out onto the internet and someone else will respond to it, and they'll have some thoughts and reflections, and I might learn something from what they say, either about myself or about the rest of the world or whatever it is.
And that's been the most interesting thing about doing this, is that I put something out there. I don't know, I have no idea what the effect is going to be. I have no idea what's going to be on somebody else's life. I hope that there is some sort of beneficial effect on the life. But I don't know. It's unclear. It's unclear who watches it, because most people on the internet are there lurking, basically, not really interacting with the stuff that they do. So it's hard to get that signal as to whether it is helping. But over time, people have been starting to come to me and say like, oh, this is how I view what you're saying. This is how it's impacted my life. And there is these really interesting downstream effects that are just starting to happen. And it's really cool. It's really joyful. You don't hear about the bad stuff. Like I don't think I'm going to hear, oh, I said something, and then this person took that and then changed their whole life radically to it, and then ended up in a ridiculous situation. I'm probably not going to hear about that, but it would be interesting to hear if that happens. But that's really what piece of content or what have you read or what have you asked yourself recently, besides what is the purpose of Lawrence, that has changed your life in a meaningful way?
Well, there's a theme here, and I don't know if there's a particular piece of content I could point to, but the theme here is about community building. And that's, kind of a buzzword people throw around, but it also feels like community building is a stage in any project, right? Even in the project of an individual life, like we're asking these questions of like, okay, I want to accomplish something in business. How do I balance my capacities with my goals, right? And it seems like one of the ways that you do that as a human being, specifically with the evolutionary programming we have, is you find other people who are thinking in the same way. Worst case, yes, you find your filter bubble, but best case, you find something that is not quite a filter bubble, but is still supportive of your aims and of helping you understand who you are, right? People who can reflect to you things that you don't necessarily see about yourself positively, right? And give you that extra momentum to uncover things and keep moving forward.
I think I've seen you post about it sometime. There's when we start down this path of spiritual inquiry and meditation, there is often we hear positive mindsets all the time, and that can be pathological sometimes, where we have a always positive mindset. So then we encounter that, and we're like, okay, so it can't be positive all the time. There is a negative side to life. We must be upfront about that. We must engage with that negative side of life. Negative, what is negative? But I think it was you who posted that even though that's the case, it still makes sense to trend towards the positive, trend towards the optimism. What do you think about that?
There's a happy medium to be struck there, and I think it's a skill. There's a metaphor in teaching and meditation that talks about tuning the mind as you might tune a guitar string, right? Not too tight, not too loose. So it's a skill to approach things in life and figure out where's that middle ground where you're not bypassing, you're not in denial about what's actually happening, right? But you're also not getting totally crushed by something and being stuck in a really negative frame of mind where you're just a victim and you're totally helpless, right? Like, okay, something that I don't like it is happening. I accept that. And in the very next moment, I still have choice as to how I respond to that.
Which brings up free will, which is one of the most interesting things I've thought about free will. And I talked about this with a guy named Nicholas Breisowitz yesterday about free will. The only free will we have is a continuous orientation towards truth. So like, because the thing that's coming up is programmed, but then I can essentially what I am, the free will that I have can then orient itself to the truth in any given moment. So a reaction comes up, that reaction is probably programmed by my environment, by my interactions with you, by millions of years of genetics. But then I have a choice in that moment. It feels like I have a choice. Maybe I don't. What do you think?
It's hard for me to come down on the side of either there is free will or there is only a very pervasive illusion of free will. But in any case, at the very least, there seems to be ignorance about what will happen next. And that's a kind of free will.
Interesting. Can you explain more about that? In ignorance of what's about to happen, or ignorance of, because we're in uncertainty, we're moving into uncertainty. And so there is not an ability to understand what will happen in the next
Right. It's like, even if we don't actually have free will in the sense of, I can do whatever I want in the next moment, which seems to be true, right? I can't just snap my fingers and dissolve into nothingness or fly out of the room or whatever it is, or, copy myself into 10 instances of Lawrence. I seem to be bounded, right, by laws. But within those bounds, no one else has any idea what I'm going to do next, right? I could sit in the chair, I could stand up, I could fall over, I could shout really loudly. And so there is some kind of freedom there in that not knowing, even if there isn't full freedom of action.
Very interesting. this gets into technology because I believe that we're about to, what we thought were principles about the way the reality worked are about to change. And if they're changing, they're not really principles. So I think technology often does this. You know, it used to be a principle that we would not be able to move across the ocean in a couple hours. And now we can move across the ocean in a couple hours and move a lot of people across the ocean in a couple hours. So that was something that people thought was fixed. So technology changes that, changes what we think is fixed.
I would say if it's changed, it's not really a principle.
Exactly.
I would say the principle there is that it's expensive to move across the ocean. And that's still true. We've just found ways to pay for that, right? Energetically pay for that, right? We've developed entire infrastructures of managing fossil fuels.
Interesting. So,
and this is just to jump in here. This is a little bit of like my what do they call it? One of those itches I like to scratch. One of my, not grievances necessarily, but ways in which I sort of try and position myself to bring some light to the blind spots of my current civilization is we don't really think about or at least it's very difficult to think about the true cost of things, right? We think about the economic cost of this microphone, this drum, this table, right, this computer, in terms of how many hours of work we have to pay for it, right? But we are so distant from the energetic and environmental work of it, right? The mining of the materials and the shipping and the overall impact on the world of that. And it's very difficult to say, oh, well, we can just use our economics as a proxy for that because economics is tied into the political power, right? And so then the more politically powerful you are, like in the US, the more distorted your view of the actual economic and environmental impact is, because the more you're using your political power to put pressure on the supply chain to make things as cheap as possible. And you go far enough down the supply chain and then you end up with like coercion and slavery and that sort of thing that really distort the economic picture.
Whoa. Interesting. You've left me speechless. It doesn't happen often, but so where do we go from here then? Knowing that ignorance is we can't look into all the externalities of all the decisions we make. I believe that technology in itself is not going to solve us, but it has to save us. But I believe that technology plus ethics, plus philosophy, plus spirituality, plus compassion are going to be the only option to save us, basically. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we have to keep increasing our capacity to integrate more and more information about what we're actually doing, what it's actually costing, right? And that is not just an informational process in a sort of dry, computational, technological sense, because as we've seen, especially over the past few years, with the internet and the rise of social media, information has an emotional cost, right? Like information can be overwhelming or like emotionally harmful if people take in too much of it. It can be isolating or distracting from the things that really matter to you in your own personal life. And so our capacity as a society to integrate more and more information also depends upon our capacity as a society to process the difficult emotions and things that have been sort of historically swept under the rug as they come up.
Which gets into meditation techniques and psychedelics and these things that act on our doors of perception, because really in order to have information come in the best way or the most effective way possible is to be able to change the doors of perception so that information is not triggering, so it doesn't trigger something in me that causes me to have overwhelm. What do you think?
I think that's one route. A big shift for me in the past few years, I started doing this program that my wife had done before me that was about sort of meditation and healing and looking at the way we relate to people in conversation and digging deep into that, much more with an emphasis on relationship to people. Like how do I show up? And I can bring all the sort of same meditative frames and tools and goals, but instead of doing it on the cushion, eyes closed, I'm doing it while talking to someone else. And And what I've learned from that is I had a lot of subconscious beliefs about the need to do things, the need to grow and learn and have capacity on my own. And I think that that was holding me back, actually. That it was something I learned for important reasons as I grew up. But now I'm in a phase where I lean a lot more heavily on what you could call social intelligence or social cognition, right? Accepting that I have a piece of the puzzle, but my piece of the puzzle is only valuable insofar as it's interacting with and dialoguing with other people's puzzle pieces.
And that brings up a really interesting point. I like Stephen Covey's framework of moving from codependence, which is essentially kind of something we have to have when we're younger, and then it's to independence and then interdependence. And that really clear distinction between codependence and interdependence. And then also, I would love to talk about, okay, well, I forgot what that was about, but let's go to how do you view that codependence, interdependence? What is the difference between codependence and interdependence?
I've been reading a great book about this. It's called Passionate Marriage. It was written, I think, like in 1990, but it's still like pretty edgy. It's by a guy named David Schnarch. He's a therapist. And the word he uses is differentiation, right? So we have this idea that, either you're apart or you're together and like emotionally fused with someone. And, they get mad, you get mad, they get sad, you get sad, and it's all just like, mixed together. And his idea of differentiation is this capacity you develop. It's sort of part of the maturation process to still have your own center, boundaries, identity, even while being intimate and close with someone else. And that I don't think that's something you learn without going through the crucible of trying to be intimate with someone else and getting fused with them and feeling that to be very painful, and then trying to learn where your boundaries are.
Interesting. So, and that idea of center is really interesting, something I've been playing with myself, because it doesn't feel like it's center in a location, although there is a location in my body that I usually go to when I try to get centered. It also feels like something else. What is that center to you?
I think that center is the place where things are okay, whatever that means for you, right? Like the opposite of overwhelm. Like this is home, this is safety, this is I can relax. This is I know who I am and what I need, and my needs are getting met. And then from there, I can branch out into challenge and risk and
relationship.
Yeah, and relationship.
And this has been so key for me for integrating my own experiences of trauma, because safety was the one thing that I didn't have on my own, and so I needed to work with others in order for them to kind of basically transmit a feeling of safety to me, show me how to create my own feelings of safety, and now I can create my own feeling of safety in pretty much any environment, which is pretty cool. There are some environments where I don't feel safe to this degree, and that seems like bringing something out of left field into anti-fragility, essentially. Like, and this is a question I often ask of, like, what is the FU money equivalent in spiritual practice, or like what FU money, for those who don't know, is once you've gotten enough money, $10 million, $20 million, where you don't really need to take feedback from other people. Feedback from other people isn't related to income. And so what is the spiritual equivalent of that? How do we become anti-fragile? And it feels like this kind of sense of safety, being able to find that center and provide a sense of safety to ourselves in trying moments. And then also, I think that transmits to other people, because if I'm feeling safe, and if that feeling of safety is impactful enough, then it can then spread, because we're social beings and stuff like that.
Yeah. I feel like there's probably a lot of different answers to that question. One of the things about spiritual practice is, it's a long journey, right? A lot of stages. And depending on what stage you're at, the answer to a given question is different.
Yep. And the question is different.
So one answer I have anyway to that question, not the answer, is that the spiritual equivalent of FU money is surrender. It's actually like unpacking the whole question, right? The whole idea of FU money is like, I am separate from the world. I need to protect myself from it. I need to armor myself against it. And so once I have a sufficient amount of financial armor, then I will be safe. Right. And so the spiritual journey, to a large extent, is about unpacking that entire story. Right. I'm actually not separate from the world. Right. If I trace my roots, the origins of my body, of my thoughts, of my emotions, of my desires, it goes back into the world. And that apparent sense of separation over time goes away, is seen to be an illusion. And the more I do that, the more I can begin to be comfortable with whatever's happening.
That's a really good point. Go for it.
While still also retaining my capacity to navigate within that. It doesn't mean I have to sit through something that's terrible, right?
Yeah.
It means that I can trust that my relationship with the world is active and open and alive, so that if something is getting terrible, I can notice and I can adjust and I can, I can leave the room or whatever it is, or say something.
And yeah, that reminds me of when you said surrender, and you also earlier talked about essentially it's different for each person. A lot of people, when you begin, this happened to me when I began, was that surrender was something I was not wanting. I didn't want, because I thought surrender meant surrender to another human being.
Right.
And that's not at all what surrender is. Because oftentimes surrender to what we're experiencing means that you need to actually establish a boundary with someone and not let something happen and say something that needs to be said, and things like that, which I think is interesting. How do you go about establishing, this is kind of interdependence thing, establishing boundaries, and what is the role of boundaries? I'll explain something about my life. Recently, I've started to realize that energetic boundaries are some of the most important. So establishing an energetic boundary before a linguistic boundary or and just kind of, and what does energetic boundary mean? It might seem kind of woo to a lot of people, but essentially recognizing that I am my own space, that there is like a membrane around me, my skin, and it separates me. It allows certain things in, allows other things. And so kind of recognizing that in the moment is one of the most helpful tools I have for establishing boundaries.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how it works, in a physical sense, but I have the same experience. You can talk about it, I think, in terms of attention or awareness. Like, I've learned that habitually I used to send sort of all of my awareness outside into the space around me. Like, I'd be tracking lots of movements and noises, and so then if there was a lot of movement and noise going on, it would be very easy for me to be overwhelmed. And so I've had this experience of learning to kind of withdraw my attention, into my body, into myself and my core, and just kind of leave it there, right? So that the external sounds and noise and movement is more distant, it's more sort of muffled. And that often comes with a feeling of more safety, right? Because I'm not so dependent on everything going around, and there's a stability and a quiet here.
You just described very well the one of these steps, the 8 steps of yoga, called pratyahara, which is they explain it as a turtle bringing its head back into its shell, basically. Which is it's very, very interesting. This is something interesting that a lot of people don't understand about meditation, that the word we use for meditation was actually is a catch-all for a lot of different techniques that people who speak Sanskrit used. One is asana, the posture, the way that you sit. One is pratyahara, that ability to withdraw the attention in and not be, and then dharana, which is concentration, which is the traditional thing that most people think is meditation, which is a technique that we concentrate on an object of consciousness, an object of meditation for a long period of time. And then the hope is that we slip into dhyana or samadhi, which are meditation in the true sense, which is a state that cannot be attained, but something that comes upon us when the conditions are right. What is your view on meditation?
It's a very broad question.
When you were in the park and just now meditating, what happened?
So like I mentioned, I've had some sniffles today, a little bit of an allergic reaction left over from yesterday. And so I was looking for some physical stability. I didn't want to be sniffling through this entire podcast. So I was just looking for a place to sit where it felt like I could just let the system calm down a little bit. And And so initially I started in a sort of more wide open sunlit part of the park, and I was doing a little bit of qigong, sort of shaking and moving the arms around, stretches. But it was pretty windy there, and after I finished my sort of more dynamic stuff, I went to sit. I went over to a little grove of trees where it was a bit more sheltered, still some sunlight coming through, and that was a more comfortable place to just sit down and go more inward. So what am I doing? I'm not these days so much focusing on any particular practice, like, okay, focusing on the bridge of the nose or whatever it is, or focusing on the breath. All of that kind of is happening in a natural way. I'm not at a place with my meditation now where I'm trying to get to any particular state, so much as I am just like, there's always some opportunity in meditation to come back home, to notice something that's maybe been a little bit overextended or a little bit too far out there, and bring it back.
And what is the role of technique in that?
I think it's like the role of technique in anything. So there's a model that I think comes from Japanese martial arts called shuhari, of learning. And shu is when you just learn technique, you just learn form, and you just drill and drill and drill, right? And it takes you from this sort of, I don't know what I'm doing, into at least I can do these three things well, right? There's a sense of clarity about what I'm doing. There's a sense of mastery and progress. And then there's the aha phase, which is where I begin to rebel against that. It seems too constricting, and I want to throw it all away and burn it. And then finally, there's synthesis, antithesis, and then, or sorry, thesis, antithesis, and then re is synthesis, where then I realize that this whole thing has been part of the journey, right? Both learning the forms and the structures, and then learning to go beyond them. And now that I've seen that arc, I can begin to be creative. I have the foundation of the forms, so I actually know what I'm talking about, right? I have the vocabulary in a given domain. But then I can see where their limitations are, and I can begin to build upon that, and maybe even come up with something that can then be offered to the next generation of students.
You can create new knowledge, essentially, new wisdom, new technique. And this is the interesting thing. Once you get to that creative aspect, you can the options are seemingly limitless for the new variation and new connections that can be made. So I'll give an example from my personal life. Recently, I do a lot of dancing, a lot of partner dancing, and partner dancing is very complicated, and it seems to be very, very helpful to get lots of instruction in how to do it at the beginning, because you're dealing with a lot of different things. You're dealing with musicality in your own body. You're dealing with rhythm, which is related to musicality. You're dealing with the movement of your own body. You're moving with both your steps and your hands. So you're moving all four limbs in a very different way. And you're also moving with a partner, and both listening to that partner, and then also if you're leading that partner, but then also paying attention to the follow. So it's like the most complex thing that I've ever done before. And now I've been doing it for about a year and a half, pretty regularly. And I was dancing with somebody the other day, and I did a move I had never done before, and I didn't think about it. It just happened. And it was so interesting, because that had never happened. I mean, it shows up in conversation, but that had never happened in my body. I never felt that experience that this move just happened. I didn't see it anywhere. It just kind of happened. It just was created. And I don't know where it came from, but it was there. It was really cool. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. I don't really have a question from that. But.
Yeah. It reminds you of this experience I had snowboarding, where there was a sense that, when you first learn, you learn in a very sort of crude binary way. This is a heel side turn. This is a toe side turn, right? So you can think of it as, okay, I'm learning to snowboard. There's only two things I can do, right? Heel side, toe side. But then you can begin to break that down into further binaries, right? Then there's degrees of toe side and heel side. Then there's toe side and heel side, but is your weight more forward or more back? Right? And it's a sense of you learn something by starting with a single binary. I guess it's a very Taoist way of looking at it, right? And then as you become familiar with that binary and it begins to get a little bit boring, then you add another binary. Now you have 4 possibilities that you get to familiarize yourself with, and then you get 8, and so on and so forth, until you have a whole fluid space of action.
Which again gets back to a metaphor for life, because with life, it includes all of that, and then more. And each kind of moment, we're in this moment, we're trying to over and over and over again, figure out where am I, what the hell's going on, and this goes down to a neurological level as well. Like the amygdala is always processing all of our information all the time for signs of what we should fear and what we should be afraid of. It's on all the time. There's no time where it's not on and not processing information. But the connection between the amygdala and the frontal cortex, our conscious experience of being aware, is not necessarily straightforward, and it's not clear what I am afraid of right now and how that's showing up in my conscious. Like the conscious mind is made up to make post facto, after the fact, rationalizations of my behavior that happened as a process of this kind of like deeper processes and stuff like that. More, which is really interesting. So I would love to continue talking about this, but I also want to talk about like technology, because it feels like you are in a space that's really interesting and impactful, and also like not necessarily unrelated to what we're talking about here. One of the questions I've been researching in this podcast is the relationship between technology and spirituality. And buzzwords that are thrown around are decentralization, centralization. Also applicable for meditation, also applicable for lived experience. We have centralization. I am centralized in this being, but then we have decentralization, which is I am not just this person. I am not just this skin. I am not just this one individual. Everything inside of me was once a part of everything else. Which goes into cryptocurrencies and blockchain and centralization. And I don't understand exactly what the company you're working for. I don't understand what a stable coin is. What is a stable coin?
A stablecoin is a cryptocurrency that's pegged to a fiat currency. So our stablecoin is called DAI, D-A-I, and one equals $1.
And why is that important that you have a stable currency that is separate from the dollar that represents the dollar?
Right. So one of the current narratives about Bitcoin, for example, the granddaddy of all cryptocurrencies, is that it's very volatile, because it is very volatile. And so that limits the degree to which it can be used for practical purposes, right? If you're going to do payroll or invoicing, right, real bread and butter business tasks with it, you can't, because you don't actually know how much it's worth from week to week.
And that's an incentive not to use it for those things.
Right. Mm-hmm. So the idea of a stablecoin is that it's an easier transition if you want to potentially get some of the benefits of cryptocurrency, some of the transparency and so forth, or access to apps built on the Ethereum blockchain, but still not have to deal with volatility.
Interesting. So what are the use cases where I would want, instead of having a US dollar, have a DAI?
Well, one of them, I mean, is if you just have trouble getting access to ordinary US dollars. So for example, some of my colleagues in Latin America, they're actually using DAI for day-to-day expenses, right? Because to get into USD or some proxy of USD, like our stablecoin, is a lot more stable than their own local currency.
Interesting. And that this reflects my own experience when I was traveling around Cambodia. Cambodia, the de facto currency is the US dollar, because their currency is like Bitcoin, is volatile. So they want to hold so that's really, I'd never realized that before. So it allows and this is interesting because it gets into Libra. What Libra offers is their coin is going to be backed by a basket of different currencies, which makes me think that they are trying to establish the next global reserve currency, basically.
Yeah. It's a very bold move, I think, if you look at the long-term implications of it.
Interesting. Okay, so people in other countries use DAI in order to put their currency into something safer than their local currency. You said something about Ethereum dApps, using Ethereum dApps. Are there any apps that you're using in your daily life that DAI help you to use?
No.
Not yet. Okay. Yeah.
It's still pretty early days.
Yeah. Interesting. Anything interesting in that sector?
There's Augur, which is a prediction market.
Have you used it yet?
I haven't personally used it. I've just poked around.
Yeah.
There's a number of what they call DeFi or decentralized finance apps now, right? If you want some access to credit, for example, but for whatever reason the traditional system isn't available to you, there's an app called Compound Finance that offers loans and a few other ones.
And are the rates better in that, or do you know?
It depends.
Okay, it depends on credit. Does it depend? What does it depend on?
Depends on a lot of esoteric things that I'm not the expert on.
Okay, right, interesting. I'll ask you later who to talk to for that, because I'm really interested, because it does seem like we've had like last year in cryptocurrency we had just like everything's going to happen. We're going to build everything on this thing because it's all going to work and it's all going to be magical, and then crash. And then now it's like Bitcoin is great and DAI is great, and those are the two things that are like, okay, that's interesting. And then there's a whole bunch of projects that might be great in like 5 to 10 years or something like that.
It really is still early days for Ethereum. You know, they're still working out like how to do layer 2 scalability.
What is layer 2 scalability?
So layer 1, right, is just the blockchain as we know it. Bitcoin is also doing this, and the point of a blockchain is that it is a very slow and expensive computer because it has consensus properties that you can't really get any other way. And so layer 1 is that sort of ironclad guarantee of those strong consensus properties, that we have a bunch of people in a network who don't necessarily agree with each other or like each other, but somehow they all come to the same agreement about what the state of reality is. But by nature, that's slow and expensive. So layer 2 is this idea of we're going to have a second network layer that is sort of tied to the first one, that kind of checkpoints back to it to tie into the underlying reality, but doesn't do it so often, so we can do more transactions per second with that second layer.
Really interesting. And so that is not solved yet. Yeah.
There's a few prototypes in progress, although I guess I haven't kept too up to date on it, but Bitcoin's layer 2 solution is called the Lightning Network, and I guess that's growing pretty well.
Okay, interesting. And so Bitcoin has its own, and where does DAI fit into that? Where does that fit into layer 2 or layer 1?
So right now we're built on layer 1.
Okay.
Right. One of the reasons you hear so much about MakerDAO and DAI is because it's one of the few apps so far that makes economic sense on layer 1, right? Because layer 1 is so slow and expensive, the only apps that make economic sense on it are the ones whose individual transactions have so much economic value that the transaction fees are worth it.
Okay, well, you're like making everything clear, which is really, really great. You're technical. I'm not. You're technical, right? Yeah. So it's really interesting to get this perspective. What is the biggest promise for this technology?
The biggest promise, oh my goodness. I think the biggest promise is that because it gives us this possibility for a group of actors to agree upon reality with no single one of them being in control, the ways in which society can coordinate groups, there are a lot of new ways that we can explore that I don't think we've totally wrapped our heads around yet.
Whoa. Which kind of gets into your point earlier that you made that I wasn't able to talk to about power differentials and then slavery coming out as a factor of that. And then this seems like it's the opposite of that, basically, because no one party can gain control of the entire network. So no one party develops that incentive to change perception of truth or change what truth looks like.
Well, blockchain in itself doesn't solve that problem. The hope is that it helps address that problem by making it easier to be transparent about what's actually going on. So there's a few projects working on blockchain for supply chain, for example. And I don't know how much you know about supply chain, but basically everything that is built has a supply chain behind it, which is a network of suppliers of all the different parts. Like, where does the metal come from? Who makes the wires, right? Who makes the LEDs? And who gets the raw material from all those things from mines, right? And so it starts out with a big multinational corporation making the final products and having the marketing departments and everything. And then it goes to smaller companies, maybe in China, right, who just build like one kind of widget and who only sell to companies, right? And then that company in turn maybe has dozens of, or if not hundreds of suppliers for their raw materials or their component parts, right? And maybe it's just a guy in a shop somewhere. Or like Starbucks, right? Makes coffee and they have a whole company for running the stores. But somewhere down there, way down the supply chain is a farmer, right? Making coffee beans. And that farmer doesn't have a lot of access to credit, doesn't have a lot of like economic literacy, right? And so these farmers are getting paid by invoices, 60, 90, 180-day invoices. And so Starbucks, the top of the supply chain, has all this leverage, right? Because they get the product immediately, but they only pay you like, X number of months later. And so sometimes these farmers, they're going through their own economic or environmental ripples, and they're short on cash. And so all they have is loan sharks.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the potentials for supply chain blockchain is that if we make that whole thing more transparent, then investors or whoever
can get value all the way down there without them having to go to a loan shark, basically.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They can say, okay, this farmer has a record of being reliable. I'm gonna, give you good terms for a loan.
So I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to go plug in my computer because it's running out of battery.
Okay.
But what is how does someone put that information on a blockchain?
Right.
And,
well, the same way they put any other information into a computer,
okay.
right? They've got to do it manually at some point, which is why it's not a panacea,
Yeah.
Like someone's actually got to do the footwork of like convincing people to use this.
And I think one of my friends on Twitter, or virtual friends, is doing something like that. She's going to Africa and somehow, like with big shipments of rice and stuff like that, I think she's putting it on, or she's somehow trying to incentivize people to do that, basically,
Cool.
which is really interesting. I'm gonna have a conversation with her. What I want to have a conversation with her. She's from Singapore. She's building this supply chain thing in Africa and Rwanda, and what I want to talk with her is the global rise of technology, production, which is something that has historically been based here, but with things like what you're talking about, is I think now about to be decentralized to major urban environments. Not even urban environments, any environment which is connected to the internet. So like I can go off into the woods, and as long as I'm still connected to the internet, the thought stream of the internet, I can create these things and collaborate with other people. What do you think about this?
So when you say technology production, I think you're focusing more on like internet technology production, because
maybe hardware is not going to be so software businesses, things that don't have a necessity to work in person on a physical good.
Yeah, for sure. That's going to distribute out to whoever is the cheapest, where you can still get the work done.
Mm-hmm. But it feels like not only the cheapest, but also the access to people who have a certain attitude about the way technology works, which used to only exist here because of the sharing of ideas that was common here, which was like, I'm building this company, you're building that company, or they might even be slightly competitive, but we're going to talk to each other to kind of figure out what's going on. That now happens on the internet, for example. Right now, we're the things that we have access to because we're here are now spread to my friends and like wherever, and so it seems like not only cost, but also just access to information in a particular language.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, MakerDAO is a great example of that. We're 100 people about, and we're in probably 30 different locations.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you guys are remote, distributed? Yeah?
Yeah.
And had you worked at a distributed company before that?
I mean, this is the largest scale at which I've done it. The last company I did it at, I was managing a team of 5 engineers, and each of them was in a different location. But now I'm managing a team that's twice that size, and each of them is still in a different location.
Interesting. And how have you adapted to the distributed work? Do you like it better? Do you not like it?
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough, especially when people are in time zones all over the world.
Yeah.
It's basically impossible to get everyone in a meeting together because someone's always, they should be sleeping.
Which I think is actually a good thing, because I hate meetings. I hate unnecessary meetings. I really enjoy necessary meetings, but unnecessary meetings are, and so that seems like a good constraint. I don't know. What do you think?
It's funny, like this environment that I'm in right now is the environment that I really wanted when I was like 25. But since that point, I've come to value the human relationship aspect of work more, and the sort of soft skills part of it, and the way in which trust and connection among a team is built in a lot of intangible ways over time, like through non-directive communication and through like bumping into people,
And you don't get that in voice chat,
I don't
video
get that,
chat.
no.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, we try and set up some times that are semi-casual, but just the fact of you having to go to the voice chat
Makes it not
right,
casual.
it makes it more formal.
something that's funny with me, because I do about half of my interviews remotely now, and I actually do most of my coaching remotely. So I have 4 people that I work with. One's a massage therapist, and that has to be in person. I don't think that's ever going to change. Mm-hmm. But the other 3 are all remote, all distributed. One's in Australia, one's in Berlin, and another one's in Israel. And so all of that happens remotely. All of the spiritual work, guided work that I'm doing is with a teacher who's not co-located with me, and I've actually never met before in person. And I'm starting to notice no difference. Although there is an intimacy, like right now, there is an intimacy that is ineffable, that is there, that does contribute to something, but it isn't necessary. And the more I get used to this other kind of intimacy, I don't know what it is, connection, the easier it is. And I'm finding that the remote interviews are basically just as good. I'd be really curious to hear what my listeners think, and like whether they notice a difference if it's recorded remotely or not. But I think it's just a matter of getting used to it. And I do think this is a metaphor for kind of where we're headed, which in terms of like most of our thought space is already online anyway. Most of our individual thought space for most people in urban environments is now primarily mediated through the internet, unless you're in person. And so it's kind of like moving that way, and it can be very stressful to adapt to it, but maybe there are some benefits to it, although probably not for our eyes, probably not for like,
yeah, time will tell.
Yeah.
We're definitely developing a new culture, and time will tell, like, if the things that we're leaving behind end up just being vestigial, or if they end up being really important, right? Like what does it mean that I can't ever have a meal with someone, right? Like that's something that in our ancestral history has been a deep source of bonding. But maybe we leave it behind and it nets out fine. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, so a couple more. I don't want to take up too much time. We've been going for like an hour or so, but I'm really enjoying this. Remote work. What is the biggest problems besides this sense you don't get this sense of comfort? What is the biggest comfort connection? Sorry. Well, what is the biggest problem that you're facing?
I mean, the asynchronous nature of remote work requires a different kind of discipline than when everyone's just in the same time zone. It's easier.
Interesting.
Because you really have to be more committed to written communication. And for some people, who grew up in chat rooms, that's very natural. And for other people, it takes a lot of adaptation.
Well, I think there are actually solutions now for that. So I've in my own life, I've started not to rely on text and rely more on voice messages, sending voice messages to people. Facebook is annoying because it only allows me to make 1-minute videos, and then it doesn't tell me when the 1 minute's over, so it cuts off most of my conversation. But Discord is another thing. Maybe you guys want to look into it. It's like Discord is voice chat, basically, voice messaging that you can use. And then also another tool, Loom, where you can make videos with your face in a little circle on the top, and then the screen share for the most video. You make little 1-2 minute clips. Those are all helpful ways to get around that message thing, because I'm starting to realize the low bandwidth of texting and other things, and the importance of more high bandwidth, high like emotional output that a video or a voice can get.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been an honor and pleasure, and I really, is there anything else you want to end with, or?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Cool.
It's been a lot of fun for me too. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. So, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah.